When Jennifer Matthews changed her Wi-Fi password in early November 2025, she had no idea her neighbor would turn her life into a living nightmare. For 2 years, Rick Connors had been secretly leeching off her internet, watching her monthly bill climb from $100 to $150 without explanation. But when she finally discovered the truth and refused to hand over the new password, Rick didn't just get angry, he launched a full-scale campaign of harassment that had her jumping at every sound. Now, standing in Judge Porter's courtroom, Jennifer was about to find out if the law would finally make him stop knocking on her door at 20 inches the morning. The notification on my phone made my stomach drop. Another $150 charge from my internet provider. I stared at the screen in my living room, my auburn hair falling over my shoulder as I leaned forward on my gray sectional sofa. This was the 3rd month in a row. 3 months of bills that had somehow ballooned 50% higher than what I'd been paying since I moved into Riverside condominiums 2 years ago. I'd always been responsible with money. At 32, I had a solid job as a marketing coordinator, a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in one of Mango Park's nicest buildings, and a budget I actually stuck to. The $100 monthly internet bill had always seemed fair for the speed I needed to work from home occasionally and stream my music while I cooked dinner or cleaned on weekends. But $150? That was eating into my savings, and I couldn't figure out why. The customer service representative I'd spoken with last week had been useless. She'd mentioned something about increased bandwidth usage and multiple devices connected simultaneously, but I lived alone. I had my laptop, my phone, and a tablet I barely used. How could 3 devices possibly cause a $50 spike? It was a Tuesday afternoon in mid-November when I called the provider again. I was wearing my cream-colored cardigan over a black t-shirt and jeans when the technician on the phone said something that made my blood run cold. The technician's voice was matter of fact. "Ma'am, according to our logs, there are currently 7 devices connected to your network. 7 devices." I counted again in my head. Laptop, phone, barely used tablet. That was 3. Where were the other 4 coming from? The technician walked me through accessing my router settings. That's when I saw them. 4 unknown devices, pulling bandwidth like they owned the place. Someone was stealing my internet. Someone had been stealing it for months. Maybe longer. The technician's tone shifted to concern. "You need to change your password immediately. Make it something complex, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, symbols. Don't use anything obvious." My hands were shaking as I typed in the new password. JAME#2025 secure. I watched as, one by one, those unauthorized devices dropped off my network. The relief was immediate, but it was quickly replaced by burning anger. Who had been doing this? Who had been quietly siphoning off my internet for God knows how long, driving up my bills while I struggled to figure out what was wrong? I didn't have to wait long for an answer. That same evening, around 7 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. Not a polite knock, a demanding series of raps that made me jump. I'd been in my kitchen with a glass of wine, finally relaxing after the stress of the afternoon. The jazz playing from my Bluetooth speaker seemed suddenly too loud as I approached the door. Through the peephole, I could see him, Rick Connors from Unit 412, directly across the hallway. He was 46, with thinning brown hair that he always wore slightly too long, as if trying to hide the bald spot forming at his crown. Tonight he wore a rumpled navy blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up and khaki pants that looked like they hadn't seen an iron in weeks. His expression was impatient. I opened the door with the chain still attached. "Can I help you?" "Rick?" Rick's tone was casual, like he was asking to borrow a cup of sugar. "Yeah, Jennifer, I need your Wi-Fi password." My jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" Rick sighed, like I was being difficult. "Your Wi-Fi password, the one for Everett Wi-Fi. You changed it, and now I can't connect." The audacity knocked the wind out of me for a second. He wasn't even pretending he hadn't been stealing from me. He was just standing there, irritated that I'd had the nerve to lock him out of something that was never his to begin with. I kept my voice steady. "Rick, that's my private internet connection. You shouldn't have been using it in the first place." Rick rolled his eyes. "Come on, it's not a big deal. I've been using it for 2 years without any problems. Just give me the new password and we can go back to normal." 2 years. He'd just admitted it. 24 months of theft. 24 months of him leeching off my internet while my bills climbed and I was left wondering what I was doing wrong. My voice was cold. Absolutely not. You've been stealing from me for 2 years, Rick. My bill went from $100 a month to $150 because of you. I'm not giving you the password. Rick's face darkened. Stealing? That's a strong word. The signal comes across the hallway anyway. It's like radio waves. They belong to everybody. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Radio waves? Rick, this is my paid internet service. I pay for it. The electricity that runs the router? I pay for that too. You pay for nothing, and you're entitled to nothing. Rick's voice rose. What about your music? I have to listen to your music all the time, blasting through the walls. Consider the internet payment for that. My music. The soft jazz I played at a reasonable volume when I was home. The same music that probably didn't even penetrate the thick concrete walls between our units. He was grasping at straws. I kept my tone firm. My music isn't that loud, and you've never complained about it before. This conversation is over, Rick. Get your own internet. I started to close the door, but Rick's hand shot out, stopping it. Rick's voice was demanding. Jennifer, be reasonable. Just give me the password. My response was immediate. No, and take your hand off my door. Now. For a moment. We stared at each other through the gap. I saw something in his eyes that made my skin crawl, entitlement so deep that he genuinely believed I was wrong for protecting what was mine. Finally, he pulled his hand back, and I slammed the door, engaging both the deadbolt and the chain. My heart was pounding as I leaned against the door. This was my neighbor. Someone I'd smiled at politely in the hallway for 2 years, exchanged pleasantries about the weather with, held the elevator for, and all that time, he'd been stealing from me, and apparently thought he had every right to continue. The first note appeared on my door the next morning. I was heading out for work, dressed in my burgundy blazer over a white blouse and black slacks, my hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, when I saw the folded piece of paper wedged between my door and the frame. I pulled it out and unfolded it. Rick's handwriting was messy, aggressive slashes across the page. Still waiting for that password. Don't be difficult. I crumpled the note and threw it in my kitchen trash before leaving for work, but the unease stayed with me all day. When I got home that evening around 6, there was another note. Then another knock, at 7:30. I didn't answer, pretending I wasn't home even though my lights were clearly on. Rick knocked 5 times, each series of raps more insistent than the last. I sat on my couch, frozen, staring at my door. This became the pattern. Every single day, multiple times a day, Rick would either leave notes or knock on my door. Morning, afternoon, evening, there was no schedule, no predictability. He'd catch me coming home from the grocery store and try to strike up a conversation that would inevitably turn into another demand for the password. He'd knock while I was making dinner. He'd leave notes when I was at work. But the worst part was the late-night knocking. The first time it happened, it was just past midnight on a Thursday. I'd been asleep for about an hour when the pounding on my door jolted me awake. My heart was racing as I stumbled out of bed. My oversized gray sleep shirt twisted around me. My hair a mess. Through the peephole, there was Rick, still in his work clothes from earlier, looking annoyed. Rick's voice came through the door. Jennifer, I know you're in there. I can see your light. Just give me the password and I'll leave you alone. I didn't respond. I backed away from the door, my phone clutched in my hand, debating whether this constituted an emergency worth calling the police over. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes, he left. But he came back. 2 nights later, at 1:47 a.m., according to my phone, then again at 2:15 a.m. on a Sunday night. Each time, the same demanding knocks, the same entitled voice insisting I owed him something I absolutely did not owe. I stopped sleeping properly. Every sound in the hallway made me tense. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the next round of knocking. I started keeping my phone on the nightstand, the emergency number ready to dial, though I still wasn't sure what I'd say. During the day, I was exhausted. My work performance started slipping. My boss noticed the dark circles under my eyes during our video calls. My friends asked if I was okay. I told them I was having trouble sleeping, which was true, but I couldn't bring myself to explain the full situation. 2 weeks into this nightmare, I tried going through official channels. The Riverside condominiums had a property management company, and I called them on a Tuesday afternoon, explaining the situation to a bored-sounding receptionist named Ashley. Ashley's voice was flat. "So, your neighbor has been using your internet without permission, and now he's harassing you about it?" I tried to keep the desperation out of my voice. "Yes. He knocks on my door at all hours, leaves notes. I haven't had a decent night's sleep in 2 weeks." There was a long pause. Ashley sounded disinterested. "Have you tried talking to him about the noise issue?" My frustration boiled over. "What? Noise issue? He's the one making noise, knocking on my door at 2 in the morning. Ashley's tone became condescending. "But you mentioned he complained about your music. Have you considered that maybe you're both bothering each other and you need to find some middle ground?" I wanted to scream. There was no middle ground between "please stop stealing my internet" and "give me your password so I can continue stealing your internet," but Ashley seemed determined to treat this like a mutual neighborly dispute rather than what it actually was, harassment. Ashley sighed. "Look, we can send a general reminder to all residents about being respectful of neighbors, but we can't get involved in personal disputes between tenants. If he's really harassing you, you might want to consider filing a police report or getting a restraining order." A restraining order. The words hung in the air after I hung up. Was it really that serious? But then I remembered the knocking at 2 a.m., the notes accumulating in my trash, the way I now flinched every time I heard footsteps in the hallway. No, I wasn't overreacting. This was serious. The thought of going to court, of making this official and public, filled me with dread. I was a private person. I didn't like confrontation. But what choice did I have? Rick clearly wasn't going to stop. If anything, he was escalating. The notes were getting more aggressive. Yesterday's note had read, "You're being selfish. Just give me the password." Today's said, "I have a right to internet access. Stop being difficult." It was that last note, the one claiming he had a right to my internet, that finally pushed me over the edge. I took photos of all the notes I'd saved. I documented every instance of knocking I could remember, with dates and times, and then I went online and started researching how to file for a restraining order in Mengo Park. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. I'd never been inside a courthouse before. But Judge Porter's courtroom was almost intimate wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lighting, a handful of benches for observers. Still, my hands were shaking as I stood at the defendant's podium, my fingers gripping the edge so hard my knuckles turned white. It was a Wednesday morning, November 19th, 2025. I'd taken the day off work, telling my boss I had a personal legal matter to attend to. I'd spent an hour that morning deciding what to wear, finally settling on a navy blue dress with a gray blazer, professional, serious. My hair was pulled back in a low bun, simple pearl earrings in place. Rick stood at the plaintiff's podium across from me. Even now, in a courtroom, he managed to look disheveled. He was wearing a suit, at least he'd made that effort, but it was wrinkled, the tie slightly askew, his thinning hair was combed over, and he had that same expression on his face, that same entitled irritation. Judge Porter sat at his bench, a black man in his 50s with close-cropped gray hair. He looked over the papers in front of him, then up at Rick. Judge Porter's voice was deep and authoritative. "All right, let me make sure I understand this correctly. Mr. Connors, you're suing to gain access to the defendant's Wi-Fi passcode. Is that accurate?" Rick tried to sound respectful. "That's right, Your Honor." Judge Porter leaned forward slightly. "Please tell us what's going on with that." Rick launched into his story. He explained how he'd been living across the hallway from me for 2 years, true. How he'd been happily using my internet signal without any problems until recently, also true, though the word happily made my blood boil. How he'd come to ask me nicely for the password several times, but I kept refusing. Judge Porter interrupted. "Nicely? You asked her nicely several times. Did she know you were using her Wi-Fi before you asked for the password?" There was a pause. I watched Rick's face carefully. This was the moment where he'd have to admit he'd been stealing from me, that he'd never asked permission, never told me what he was doing. Rick finally admitted it. I didn't say anything. I just thought she knew. Judge Porter's tone was carefully neutral. "You thought she knew. Sir, how did you know it was her Wi-Fi you were using?" Rick sounded confident in his reasoning. "The network name was Everett Wi-Fi. She lives in Unit 4, 10, Across the hall. I put two and two together. Judge Porter turned to me. Ma'am, were you aware he was using your Wi-Fi? This was my moment. I took a breath, steadying my voice. No, Your Honor. I had no idea anyone was using my Wi-Fi until my bills started going up exponentially. My monthly bill went from $100 to $150, and I couldn't figure out why until I called my provider and they told me there were multiple unauthorized devices on my network. I saw Rick shift uncomfortably at his podium, but I kept going. When Mr. Connors first came to my door asking for the password, I was shocked. That's when I realized he'd been the one stealing my internet. I told him politely that I couldn't give him the password because my bill was getting too high and it was getting out of my price range. I thought that was reasonable. Judge Porter's interest was clearly piqued. And what did he say to that? I paused, remembering that first confrontation at my door. He told me that since I play music in my apartment and he can hear it across the hallway, having to listen to that was payment enough for the internet. A ripple of reaction went through the courtroom, just a few observers, but I heard the quiet murmurs of disbelief. Judge Porter's eyebrows raised slightly. Judge Porter's voice sharpened. Mr. Connors, is that true? Did you tell Miss Everett that having to listen to her music was payment for using her internet? Rick tried to defend himself. Well, Your Honor, I do have to hear it, and the airwaves belong to the people, you know? The radio signal from her router comes across the hallway. It's already there. Judge Porter leaned forward. Sir, are you aware that in order for Miss Everett's music to work, she probably has to use electricity to operate whatever device she's using to play that music? Rick answered quickly. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Porter continued his line of questioning. And are you aware that the same electricity is being used to power her Wi-Fi router, sending that signal into the airwaves, as you put it? Rick hesitated slightly. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Porter's tone became pointed. And are you paying for the electricity inside her home? Rick's voice was quieter now. No, Judge Porter pressed the point. Then how are you entitled to anything coming from her residence if you're not paying for any of it? The silence that followed was deafening. Rick opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. Well, the signal comes across the hallway. It's already there. But Judge Porter wasn't having it. He turned back to me. Judge Porter's expression was serious. Miss Everett, you mentioned that Mr. Connors has been harassing you. Can you elaborate on that? This was it. This was why I was really here, not because of the Wi-Fi itself, but because of what had happened after. I straightened my shoulders and looked directly at Judge Porter. Yes, Your Honor. After I refused to give him the password, Mr. Connors started knocking on my door constantly, multiple times a day, at all hours. He leaves notes on my door demanding the password. He's knocked at 7 p.m., 10 inches the afternoon, and I paused at 2, 0 inches the morning. Judge Porter's voice sharpened immediately. 2 in the morning? He turned to Rick. Is that true, Mr. Connors? Rick's face flushed. Your Honor, Judge Porter cut him off. Did you knock on this woman's door at 2, 0 inches the morning? Yes or no? Rick admitted it. Yes. But Judge Porter wasn't interested in excuses. How do you justify knocking on somebody's door at 2 a.m. for anything that's not an emergency? Rick tried to deflect. The music Judge Porter interrupted again. Did you call the Mango Park Police Department about the music? Rick answered quietly. No, Your Honor. Judge Porter continued. Did you contact the condo association? Rick shifted on his feet. Yes. They said they couldn't help. Judge Porter sat back in his chair. I could see the decision forming on his face before he even spoke. Judge Porter's voice was firm and final. Here's what I'm going to recommend. First, your request for Miss Everett's Wi-Fi password is denied. If you want internet service, Mr. Connors, I suggest you purchase your own. Contact your service provider, get them to set you up, maybe they can bundle it with your phone or TV service. Get your own. Rick's face went from red to almost purple, but Judge Porter wasn't finished. Judge Porter's tone became more severe. Second, I'm granting Miss Everett a temporary restraining order against you. That means no more notes on her door. No more knocking, not at 7 0 inches the morning, not at 1 0 inches the afternoon, and certainly not at 2 at night. Am I making myself clear? Rick muttered his response. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Porter emphasized his point. If Miss... Everett reports that this restraining order has been violated in any way, any form, shape, or fashion. I will have the Mango Park Police Department bring you back here, and we will have this conversation again. Am I making myself clear, sir?" Rick's voice was barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Porter concluded the case. "Good. Your case is dismissed." I walked out of that courtroom feeling like I could finally breathe, for the first time in weeks. The November air was cold against my face as I stepped outside the courthouse, but it felt clean, refreshing. I stood there on the steps for a moment, just letting it all sink in. Judge Porter had listened. He'd understood. He'd seen right through Rick's ridiculous justifications and entitled attitude, and had shut it down completely. Not only was Rick not getting what he wanted, but he couldn't harass me anymore either. The temporary restraining order meant I could finally sleep at night without jumping at every sound in the hallway. Rick had stormed out ahead of me, his face twisted in anger. I'd heard him mutter something about the judge's ruling stinking and how he was entitled to that password. Even in defeat, he couldn't see how wrong he'd been. But I didn't care what he thought anymore. For 2 years, he'd been stealing from me without my knowledge. For 2 weeks, he'd been terrorizing me in my own home. And now, finally, it was over. As I walked to my car, I pulled out my phone and texted my best friend Sarah. "It's done. Got the restraining order. I can finally sleep tonight." Sarah's response came immediately. "Thank God. We're celebrating this weekend. Wine and that terrible reality TV you love. My place." I smiled. The first genuine smile I'd had in weeks. That evening, back in Unit 410, I made myself dinner and poured a glass of wine. I turned on my Bluetooth speaker and played my jazz playlist, not too loud, just at my normal, comfortable volume. As the smooth notes of a saxophone filled my kitchen, I leaned against my counter. My phone buzzed. An email from the internet provider. "We noticed your data usage has decreased significantly. Would you like to consider a lower-tier plan?" I laughed out loud. Yes, I would definitely like to consider a lower-tier plan. Maybe I could even get back down to that original $100 monthly bill. There was no knock on my door that night, no notes waiting when I checked my doorstep before bed. Just quiet. Beautiful. Peaceful. Blissful. Quiet. As I climbed into bed, wearing my comfortable gray sleep shirt, my hair loose around my shoulders, I set my phone on the nightstand like I used to, not clutched in my hand, ready to call for help, but just resting there. And for the first time in 2 weeks, I fell asleep easily, knowing that tomorrow morning I wouldn't find another threatening note, wouldn't hear that aggressive knocking, wouldn't have to deal with Rick Connors and his astronomical sense of entitlement. The nightmare was finally over. And all it took was one judge willing to say what should have been obvious from the start. No, you're not entitled to steal from your neighbor. No, you can't harass someone for refusing to let you keep stealing. And no, the airwaves do not, in fact, belong to you just because you want them to. Judge Porter had given me back my peace, my home, and my ability to sleep at night. And he'd taught Rick Connors a lesson that was long overdue. Other people's property isn't yours just because you want it, and there are consequences when you refuse to accept that simple truth.